chief executive officers and participants registering for the Africa CEO Forum in Geneva. The CEO of the forum, Mr. Amir Ben Yahmed, tells us why the theme Africa's New Economic Environment was chosen.
It's been its third edition. We are receiving about 800 participants from 64 countries, including 43 African countries. It has been created to be the promoter of the private sector voice towards governments and trying to promote all the success stories of the African companies, promote the networking between African companies from East Africa, West Africa, Northern Africa, Southern Africa, and trying also to promote meetings between financials people from private equity, bankings, and the company that are trying to raise cash for their development.
Taking a cue from the last edition, Mr. Yahmed noticed that the event records increased participation each year.
We have about 15% increase in attendance each year. We keep the same quality. It's reserved for CEOs. So I think the figures speak for themselves.
Topics which center on doing business in Africa, improving on family businesses, and providing structured finances are going to be discussed at the forum.
The real outcome we want from this session is we want to put on the agenda the reform of the business environment. That's the main thing we want to focus. We have invited, for example, the Prime Minister of Georgia, who showed that in 5 years you can gain 95 spots on the Doing Business rankings. So we want to show that it's possible to be among the top 50 reformers and also to do it very quickly.
It's the third edition of the Africa CEO Forum held in here in Geneva, Switzerland. As you can see behind me, it's a flurry of activities. CEOs from various countries, from many companies are represented here, discussing business strategies and how to move their various economies forward. They look forward to having fruitful deliberations as the meeting gets underway. From Geneva, Bolaji Akinwale for Channels Television News.
Well, Bolaji joins me live now from Geneva, Switzerland via Skype. Hello, Bolaji. So good to have you join me on the program. Now, let's talk about the mood. Although we saw what, yesterday, the registration mood and the rest of it, the CEOs, pretty excited about all the discussions they're going to be having today. But what's the mood like this morning? Is it the same thing as what we saw yesterday?
Yes, there's a lot of expectation regarding what decisions and the issues that will be discussed today. We're seeing CEOs talking and deciding, charting new courses in terms of what strategies they will be employing for the movement, for the growth of the various companies. Now, today we heard from Donald Kaberuka, the CEO, the president of African Development Bank. He was saying that there is a need for Africans from the various countries to ensure that the funding gap in the continent is actually bridged. He was speaking that there is the need for the African Development Bank itself to assist various companies on the continent to access financing, to access funding, which is a very key issue here at the forum. Now, at the moment, there is a plenary going on, which is taking a look at a 5-year plan for African economies, the 2015 to 2020 growth plan for African economies. What strategies, how can they achieve the various plans to help sustain economic growth?
Help sustain economic growth. At what time, Bolaji, are they going to be having discussions with regards to the global issues that have actually come up? Of course, if you listen to the conversation I had with Bosun here in the studio, we looked at some of those issues, particularly the fact that we have falling oil prices. We do not know how soon that's going to, bottom out. And it's looking like, going forward in the next couple of weeks, we might see oil prices drop further below $50 per barrel. Now, what's the ambience like? What are the discussions like? Are they focusing and turning towards that direction, looking at how African countries can stabilize in the eventuality that oil prices drop lower than they already have?
It's like going back to the drawing board. We heard from the CEO of the firm himself, Amir Ben Yahmed, saying that the fall in commodities prices is of concern to African companies. So not just commodities, we have oil prices also a major challenge for African economies, Nigeria included. So At this point in time, the focus is what other means can be adopted to ensure that economies are safeguarded from further plunge of commodity prices that is actually facing many of these African economies. So there is a challenge of having to balance the fall in the price of commodities and to ensure that growth is recorded in the various African economies. It was speaking, like I brought you the report yesterday, saying that that is a focus for the CEOs attending this meeting. What else can be done to ensure that we are not exposed to the fall, the volatility in commodities prices around the world? We should adopt other measures that would help stabilize our economies, that would help make us to be forward thinkers in terms of what else can be done, what strategies can we put on the table to ensure that we are able to achieve growth, sustain growth at that rate.
Well, thank you so much, Bolaji. Of course, we know that we'll keep, speaking with you in the course of the day to get more details, but do enjoy the rest of the program. Our business correspondent Bolaji Akinwale joining me live via Skype from Geneva, Switzerland, venue of the Africa CEO Forum for 2014. It has the theme, Africa's New Economic Environment. Well, Bosin, if you listen to Bolaji, she says, of course, that the opening session has already started, the plenary has already started, and Donald Cabrera
you don't put 800 African CEOs
of the Africa
together
Development
from
Bank.
30 African countries in one single room, and you delay business. This is just 2 days, 48 hours. This is a deal-making event. This is not just about talk shows. If you look at the program online, you find that most of these will be interactive, holding business meetings, and as we heard in their report, finding money to fund projects. This is not just about talk shop. This is not the time for too much long talk. It's about allowing the CEOs to sit down, as you have heard, the private equity guys, the investors, the venture capitals, the angel investors, what have you, mutual fund managers, whoever is there, to come together very quickly and say, what can I get out of this two-day event? So most of these, as you heard, will center around how to get Africa's business environment more competitive, where there will be some of these sessions to listen into best practices and examples from around the world, perhaps the one from Georgia in Eastern Europe. And that is one very small country that Africa could have a lot to learn about, coming from the rock bottom to the top of those World Competitive Index in very few years, and being able to command attention. If you watch some international TV channels, you find advertisements about doing business in Georgia. So a very small country, down there somewhere in Poland and what have you, Romania, and you find Georgia, they're just doing good business. And how come that we can do that in Africa? Well, you find a few African countries that are setting some very good examples, like Rwanda, coming from the genocide of 20 years ago, 21 years ago, and ramping things up very quickly to become a major investment destination, locking itself into the East African community with Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, a bit of Mozambique, and up to the north to Ethiopia. Now that block is providing a very good example of how to do business in Africa. They are integrating a lot more quickly. We aren't seeing much of that in West Africa. So they need to talk to the West African folks where I belong about how to get our West African trade protocol up and running. We need to get the West African Power Pool project up and running very quickly, which is situated in Ghana, with Mali to the north and the rest of West Africa. We need to get Ebola out of the way. We need to get those countries at the heart of that.
It seems as if they started, dealing with the Ebola issue, but right now,
yes, we need to get it out of the way so that
major challenge really
yes, so that investors can actually come in.
Actually.
Well, but you need to take the disease out of the way. We need to have a kind of a closure to that virus and that epidemic. Then move on to count the costs. Then move on to rebuild those countries. That's very key to West Africa. If you don't do that very quickly, you find East Africa overtaking West Africa by a very long stretch. And I'm sure there's still a number of issues to discuss as well.
Yes, so let me just quickly run through some of those issues that will be discussed. There will be, like I said, looking at discussing in depth Africa's economic outlook, and discuss the growth paths of Africa's economies over the next 5 years, as well as address the subject of Africa's competitiveness. Now, just to give you a heads up, the National Bureau of Statistics will release inflation data for February on Tuesday, and we hope to have a conversation with the Statistician General, Dr. Yemi Kale, for more robust conversation on the numbers. But analysts of Financial Derivatives Company Limited are predicting a 0.2% spike in the headline inflation to about 8.4% from 8.2% in January. It promises to be an interesting couple of hours, like let's say 48 hours, and if you follow Business Morning, I'm sure definitely you get the latest news and updates as they come in real time. But I'd like to thank you both for coming on the program this morning.
My
it
pleasure.
was an interesting time out. Of course, I'm going to still have you on the show tomorrow.
Yeah, got to talk about inflation. I'm sure the numbers are there. Dr. Yemekare must be watching these and smiling and say, well, I wish this guy's not the number. But it's something he has in his heart. We don't know about it until tomorrow. But of course, we'll talk to him tomorrow about it.
Bosun, always a pleasure to have you on the program. Also, don't forget the Africa CEO Forum 2015 is ongoing rather in Geneva. You can follow at Biz Morning for more information on it as well. But that's the program for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Harriet Agbinyi. Bye-bye.